with us. And tonight, our resident legal, well, I shouldn't say legal, I should say our resident insurance expert, Mr. Tommy Ruke, is taking time out to join us. And tonight's a little bit of a different format. So if you are participating in the chat, that's great. Continue to make those comments. But we've already done the show, so we can't necessarily see them as you're doing them to participate with you. However, we wanted to make sure that we were able to bring you guys a show on our normal scheduled time. So this show has been pre-recorded. So with that being said, I want to go ahead and welcome Chuck and Tommy into the show. Good evening, good evening, gentlemen, or good morning, I should say, since we're actually on an early Saturday morning. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Rico. Morning, Tommy. Tommy, thank you so much for joining us today. We have Tommy Ruke, who is known fondly as Professor Truck Insurance in the U.S. He's probably one of the top authorities on truck insurance. He started a foundation down in Florida called, and it's a nationwide foundation for educating insurance people called the MCIEF, Motor Carrier. What is it, Tom?
Motor Carrier Insurance Education Foundation.
And I had the privilege of being down to his conference just before COVID and being on a panel and meeting a lot of really great insurance people. And when it comes to insurance, there's nobody that knows the truck insurance industry like Tommy. He shares his knowledge with people in the industry, and he's sharing it with our listeners today. Unfortunately, we can't take any questions, but you're certainly going to learn a lot from what's going on. Some of the things you're not going to like, but things change. And Tommy, thanks again for joining us. So
let me make a comment here. If they type in the chat window questions, they can be captured, and Rocco, you can send them to me, and we'll answer them later, not on live on the show, but come back later. Also, If anybody's interested in this, they can send me directly an email at Tommy, Tommy, at mcief.org, and I'll answer them. So we can get the questions answered. It just won't be done as we're speaking here today.
And let me add one more thing too, Tommy, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get rolling all the way. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, we would love your participation. We love your interaction. So remember, if you find anything that we have here to say today useful for yourself or someone else that you know that may be in the industry, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Share the video. We're trying to make sure that we're growing the platform, that we're getting our message out to as many people as we possibly can. So, that's the reason for one of the video format. We wanted to try to make it a little bit more interactive, a little bit more personable. Also, this goes right in line. This is one of the important keys to running your business. Insurance is one of those costs that should be on your spreadsheet as a fixed cost for the time period of your policy duration. So the better you are at understanding and getting your costs down, or as best as you possibly can with the best possible coverage, this is something that is critical to your operation and the success of your company. So by having Tommy on, that's going to help you get a little bit of ammunition so that you can start to better prepare for your policy renewals and different things that you may be able to implement into your operation to possibly help you be able to get a better rate and possibly get even better coverage. So make sure that you guys, we try to make sure that we're bringing you actionable information that you can actually utilize and use to make your operation better and successful in the future. So with that being said, I'm going to turn the floor back over to Professor Insurance, Mr. Tommy Ruke.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's just, Chuck and Rocco, I've never seen it before in our industry where the chasm between a preferred risk and a marginal risk is greater. Right. And that is basically three things. First off, how long they've been in business. Of course, new ventures are a problem. They were a lot of new ventures, as you know, coming out of the COVID, but those have kind of waned a little bit. And so how are these new ventures going to stay through this turbulence, pricing, rate things and that you all deal with all the time. The second most important thing is, even though I don't have a long history, can I prove I'm still safe? And that gets to the idea of using the data that's available, and are you willing to share that data? And the third thing is the part of what you're doing to improve, to make your profile look. What underwriters look at first, besides how long you've been in business, because they look at the history. It's not necessarily how long you've been in business, but with no history, we can't determine how you're going to operate in the future. And that's the concern you have here. So what the underwriter looks at when they look at the application from the retail agent, that you give, the information you give to your retail agent, who then sends it to your insurance provider, they say, if something happened, if a crash happened, can I defend them in court? Can I go and hire a lawyer and do know what to do? Now, contrary to what some of you might think, well, if I'm bad, if it shows I'm bad, then that's bad. No, we're in the insurance business. If you didn't have crashes, we wouldn't be in the business. We're here to pay for your crashes. The only thing we want to know about is all the facts concerning that crash so we know how to handle it. If you did something wrong, then we don't hire the lawyers. We don't pay them $400 an hour. We don't get, we'll start paying the client now. So actually, when you have a video that shows you did something wrong, meaning the car in front of you, you ran into it. That's the forward-looking cameras. If we see that you did that, then we don't worry about anything more than try to settle it at a reasonable price and get out of it, that part of it. But if we see you did nothing wrong and we want to defend it, the problem here is now that private passenger vehicle, which causes 75 to 80% of all the crashes. The private passenger vehicle causes the crashing. If all we have is a front view, what they're going to come back and say, yeah, but the driver was looking down. The driver was, he or she was on the cell phone. The driver wasn't paying attention. Those kind of things. So without the driver view, we don't know the whole picture. If we have the whole picture, then we know that we have something to defend. And surprisingly, plaintiffs' attorneys, Chuck, are out there to make money, right?
Of course.
If they got the evidence to see the evidence is not on their side, meaning you got both views, you'd be surprised how many of them walk away. Because they're on it for a percentage of recovery. If all the facts are against them, meaning you got both views, then they're not going to waste their time because they don't get any money unless they win. I'm sorry, Rico, I'll cut you off.
So is there a lot of pushback that is going on in a court case when you have the camera view of the outward, but you don't have the, like you say, you need the complete view. So if you don't have the view of the driver, but you have the outward view, and it's only showing that one perspective, have there been a lot of pushback in court cases utilizing that, or is that what's stemming this kind of push to make sure that they get that information?
Rico, the term pushback I don't like. I don't know the pushback. Obviously, if the car in front of them did everything wrong, then maybe they settle that. But there's always that opportunity to say the driver was also doing something because somebody saw them, another vehicle saw them. So what I just mentioned is that if we have everything, the plaintiff's attorney a lot of times will run away. If the plaintiff's attorney thinks they can bring something up, then what happens is they keep the case going. And so sooner or later down the line, we pay something just to get it closed, even though we know we didn't do anything wrong. That's the scenario that we have. Instead of defending it, now we have to prove we didn't because we don't have the driver view to prove that the driver was paying attention. He or she was not on the phone. He or she wasn't distracted. They weren't looking down. They weren't picking up coffee. They weren't, right on the computer. If you don't have the whole picture, Rico, there's always a chance the plaintiff's attorney will keep pursuing the claim, not because they think they're going to win a whole lot of money, not because of nuclear verdicts, but because they can get something, and insurance companies will pay because the choice insurance companies going to make. How do we defend that? If they want $10,000, they want $20,000, folks, that's not even getting to the courthouse. That doesn't even pay to defend it. They'll write the check just to get it out of the way. The plaintiff's attorney will take it because they know the person didn't cause the accident anyway. But with both views, a lot of times we then spend the cost to defend and we walk away. That's the big view here. Now, the other thing the cameras are doing, the third element we're talking about, they're used for training. All this new technology, class mediation, the driver assistance programs, the camera training programs have proven to be driver assistance. I don't want to talk about autonomous vehicles, to help the driver to be safe. Chuck, I think that, I don't know if you'll agree with this, Filene, and Rico, you both have driven these 18-wheelers. I have not, other than taking it down to the dealership, which I have to have with my father. I've ridden a lot of those, but I haven't really ever been driving. But what the insurance company is finding out is a driver with some experience, but younger, with the technology, ends up to be a safer driver than someone with 30 years experience, because the older driver gets more complacent. It's just like an airline pilot where they have that checklist. So we're finding that this technology to help the driver be safer, to warn them when they're doing something wrong.
So true. And I think what happens is a lot of times from a training aspect, you know, it's even with certain sports I've heard, and I'm not a sports guy, unlike you two, but my understanding is with the game of golf, if you don't, if you're out golfing by yourself all the time, you're never going to get good, and you're only going to become, any of your bad habits are just going to get worse. Trucking is the same way. If you're driving a truck all the time, you've had basic training, you're out there on the road for 20 years, you may have picked up some really bad habits, and you haven't had anybody say to you, well, you shouldn't be doing this or you should be doing that. And I think having the cameras both inward and outward facing as a training tool, then safety management, whether it's the insurance company or the carrier, if it's a larger carrier, can watch their trucks go up and down the road. And if they see drivers making errors, they can bring them in and coach them. And I think that we're missing out on that aspect. We can all become better drivers from coaching. Every one of us. I don't care how good you are. There's always room for improvement.
Chuck,
Here's one thing from a small guy's perspective. I love, of course, that's what we do the show for. We try to come at it from a small guy's perspective. And I think one of the main pushbacks that you may get from people that's 1 to 5 trucks is one thing. Okay, we hear you talking about all this technology and everything. Who's paying for it? How we don't necessarily have the budgets to go out and buy all the different top of the line equipment for the different facing cameras or something like that. Are the insurance companies or the providers of said equipment, are there going to be different subsidies that they may be able to give back, or will you possibly see some type of concession and premium from insurance companies if you have this type of equipment?
I think it's the other way, Rico. I think what you're going to see, from my understanding, is that if you don't have the equipment, you're going to pay a heck of a lot more. And I think within, I would guess, 3 to 5 years maximum, good luck getting insurance if you don't have that. Because the insurance companies, as Tom was saying, and Tommy, you may want to pipe in here, that there's now the insurance companies are really getting on. They realize that having this technology and this data protects them and allows them to be better insurance companies and make better choices and make money.
Let's talk about 2 types of technology, okay? The one technology is the equipment, crash mitigation, warning devices, and things like that. Rico, yes, those are expensive. When your trucker and the smaller motor carrier moves up to newer trucks, they need to start looking at that technology, because clearly there's return on investment when you buy a newer truck, or they're now buying a used truck that has that equipment on it. They got to look at those and embrace those kind of equipments here. But just like your newer cars, they have all that on it. The newer trucks have that on it. That's where you get return on investment. The cameras are cheap. The cameras are getting this, but even without the cameras, Rico, do the 95% of the trucks down the highway, do they have an ELD in it? Electronic log device.
Sure.
I'm pretty sure it's a pretty high percentage, but you still have a bunch of trucks from because of our segment of the population a lot of the owner operators, part of the independents, you still have a bunch of these guys that are still holding on to the older trucks because they don't even want to go to the ELD mandate. So
And that scares the heck out of an underwriter.
Yeah.
Because now you're saying I want to cheat and
Yeah.
have that. Now that might be taken away too. But my point, Rico, I totally agree with that. But if they got an engine that was built before 2000, what kind of fuel miles did that engine get? 6 or 7 miles it got versus a newer truck getting 10. It's a false savings on this pushback. That's number one. And again, I understand these pristine trucks and people keep them, and I commend those people who do that. I'm not talking about those kind of things for those reasons, but that's the first thing. But now with the ELD in it, it ties into the electronic control module, which tracks everything. So even though they don't have the cameras, they don't have both, at least now we have the data where they hard braking, when they stopped, when they were speeding and things like that. So that's why at least the insurance companies are looking for is, will you share your ELD? This is the major difference in insurance today. Prior to LDs, prior to what happened today, we were what I would call a reactive insurance provider. We only look at what we know about. Here's your past history. Well, I don't have any. Here's your MVR. That's good. Here's your CSA scores. There's not much there. Here's where you crashes. We know those. All things happen in point in time that we now try to make a judgment. Are that going to be repeated in the future? And if so, what happens? And again, going back, could we defend it? But now by showing you or sharing your ELD information with us, now we know what you're going forward. So we now can keep track that you have done these right, or you're continuing doing it right. Or Rico, what happens if you come to me and say, Tommy, I've been in business 2 years. I've done everything right. How do you prove you did everything right? By giving me your past ELD information that has the EMC that shows you had no hard brakes, you were not speeding, and things like that. So now we can see facts that we know about. Now the cameras, the front view camera and the driver view camera is not all that expensive. And there's been 3 or 4 markets that have come up just in the last couple of weeks that have announced who has partnership, the technology companies who have partnership with insurance companies that are now giving subsidies or credits if they have those cameras and are willing to share them, as well as training the driver. It's a win-win, this situation, Rico, because what happens if this camera helps, as Chuck said, train your drivers, or if that camera reminds you as a driver of things to do and you avoid the crash? What's your saving in the long term? So this is what we're dealing with that we have to balance.
Let me see. I got an anecdotal story. Let me see. Make sure she ain't here. Yeah, my wife, she stepped out. Okay, so we just recently renewed our personal insurance, and they got most of these insurance companies now. They want to be able to track you using your cell phone. And now I signed up. I went ahead and did what I needed to do and was able to track my trips or whatever using my cell phone. That woman of mine, she. So I got that pushback from my wife. So I can imagine the pushback that's going to come from the trucking community when it comes to they say they feel like the whole invasion of privacy. So I guess I asked a little earlier, are these significance going to be that? Are these discounts going to be significant enough to maybe get some people to come on board to embrace this technology?
Let me say 3 things in your comments, okay? First, I don't think everybody is ever going to, quote, embrace it. It's a necessary evil. Second part of it, it's not privacy. It's a business situation. Business. This is not privacy. There's been court rulings that the highway is public highway and the activities on public highway has no degree of privacy. This is the thing. This is a business operation, so this has been handled in court. There's no invasion of privacy and those kind of things. And then what you made a decision with your wife. Am I going to get less cost of insurance by sharing it or not? She says no, so now you're paying more. What I'm suggesting to you in a trucker where insurance is 7 or 8% of the total cost, that gap is going to be great enough that they're going to have to make a business decision. Am I going to pay 20 or 30% more of insurance than my competitor is paying because I'm not willing to share it? That's going to be their decision, but sooner or later, that's going to be a decision they're going to have to make, that part. So this is why this is becoming more and more prevalent. And think about it, Rico, we know it's there.
Right.
So if we know it's there, why can't we have it?
Well, I mean, at
at
the end of the day, too. I mean, like I said, if you whether you know it or not, I mean, your cell phone, whether you give it, it's still tracking you regardless, unless you put this thing in a where it can't receive a signal or receive a signal or transmit a signal. It blocks the signal completely out of the phone, whether it's turned on or turned off. It's tracking you. It's got your information. I mean, you know,
there you go.
Basically have everything that you need. So when it comes down to it, you know, when people talk about these different things, I'm pretty sure that, you know, if a court case goes that far, they'll get your information. They'll just ping the cell phone towers and have as much information as they need on you anyway.
Right at time of court. But let me make this comment about this. I know of one insurance company who now has aligned with a software program that blocks the driver for using their phone while the truck is moving, except for emergencies. And that's a positive thing, because that's the distraction that you have.
100%.
And that will take that away. And that's a very simple app that can put in there that puts, so the phone is blocked. So it's not being used. And I'm not saying it can't be tracked, but to keep that distraction away from the driver. I mean, think about it, Chuck.
You're right.
You run down the highway. You look at the possibility of being inspected. If you're running down a highway, you don't get inspected unless the DOT officer sees something wrong with you. So you don't get a CSA scores. So are you speeding? Are you following too close? Is your load turned down? Is your truck dirty? When you go through a weigh station, port of entry, the officer looks at it. If your cell phone's sitting on the dash, if your computer's open sitting on the passenger seat, and if you have a McDonald's bag sitting on your lap, you're going to get pulled over.
Yeah.
If the cab looks clean and they don't see all that stuff, they do what? Pass you through in 90%, because you don't get inspected until they put your DOT number in their computer that says to inspect or not. I mean, it's just the simple things that we can train the driver. The joke I used to say is the seatbelt. Nobody likes seatbelts. I say, at least buy a shirt with a stripe on it. It looks like you got a seatbelt. I mean, let's be smart about this stuff.
Tommy,
now, I don't recommend that, but to avoid being that part of it, this is where we think about how we can operate and be able to go forward at the most reasonable price. I mean, many years ago, I used to play a lot of basketball, and somebody asked me one time, can we play against the IRS enforcement officers? And I said, yes, but under somebody else's name. What I'm talking about here, anytime you run down the highway, you don't want to be called out. So the things that you can become non-notice about is worrying about all this stuff. And these cameras, inward looking with the training, helps you do that, because they warn you if you're speeding. They warn you if you're going too fast. They tell you a time to monitor things that the driver might not always be aware of. And then if something happens, you can prove you did something right. Again, I'm not saying ever embrace it, but I tell you where we are. And I always like to be a futurist. One of the advantages I have because of the foundation, Chuck will tell you that I try to push two things. I try to push information so that the trucker is a better insured. I didn't say less premium, a better insured. They got to negotiate that premium with their insurance carriers, but a better insured as we view. The second thing is I want to try to alert them to what's going to happen in the future. As Chuck just pointed out, 3 or 4 years ago, this is going to become almost mandatory to get anything close to a reasonable price for insurance.
Well, you know what, Tom? The way I look at it now, you got to remember, I'm passionate about this. I'm passionate about the trucking industry, obviously, just like you guys are. And I think I'm a realist. And I've bought enough truck insurance for the last 40 odd years, so I know a little bit about it. Truck insurance companies have not been making money in the last probably 5 years because of nuclear decisions. It has been the number one enemy of of trucking companies. And if trucking companies, we need them to be profitable or we can't get insurance. That's the thing.
You mean insurance companies be profitable?
Yeah, the insurance companies have to be profitable. Everybody's got to be profitable. The insurance companies, in order to be profitable, have to be able to control their losses. And the only way in today's society, remember, this is not 1974 when I started driving. This is 49 years later. The only way that the insurance companies can be profitable is by controlling their losses. Okay, they're not worried about you. God forbid you're in a snowstorm in the middle of Wyoming and a big storm comes and blows you off the road and destroys your truck. They're in business for that. They can handle that. They'll cut the check. There's no issue. Okay. The issue is when somebody hits a car and the driver of that car loses his or her life or one of their passengers, and now all of a sudden there's a $20 million lawsuit. Whether they're going to pay that or defend it costs a lot of money. And they don't want to do either if they can help it. They're trying to lower their costs so they can lower your cost. This is the new world. We are in the trucking industry. We are fighting a war right now against these plaintiff bar lawyers. They are our arch enemy. When you're driving down the highway, you see that 1-800 sign, 1-800 sue a trucker, or you're watching late night TV and some clown with a toupee comes on and tells you how you can get rich quick by suing a trucker if you've been hit, because they see us, these guys, and they are the lowest form of life as far as I am concerned, because truckers, we have proven that we are paramount to this economy and to this continent, because everything moves by truck. And they are really doing a lot of damage. They've done a lot of damage. And the only way we can get in front of them is through embracing this technology. And I know that a lot of our listeners are probably going to be really mad at me for saying this, but we have no choice, because what's going to happen within 5 years, no insurance company is going to insure anybody that doesn't have the technology in their trucks. And you can drive a 1947 Dodge, they don't care, but you better have an ELD in it, because they're not going to want to insure interstate carriers that don't have ELDs. Even if you're doing everything right, that paper log, when plaintiff bar gets hold of one of these paper logs, they're going to rip the whole thing to shreds. Okay, I don't care how diligent you are at keeping it accurate, which is really hard. We've all done it. It's not easy. There's always room for error somewhere, even form and manner. We all know that we used to get pinched all the time for something stupid. We didn't check off a line or whatever. And I think this is the way of the future.
Chuck, I want to also talk about a couple of things that you just brought up on this part of it, because most of the nuclear verdicts you hear when they go to court, they don't go to court more than 5 or 6% of the time. These judgments here, most of those nuclear verdicts are not collectible unless it is a Warner or a Swift or big trucking companies. The one in Florida that's met a headline, the $1 billion case,
right?
2 truckers were involved. 900 million of that was punitive damages, which is not even insurable. Right. $1 million had already been paid on that case before it ever went to court, and there was nobody to defend that. Those are the attorneys getting a trophy on their wall so they could advertise. Right. The problem you have, though, is a fear of going that way. And yes. So what happens, so your audience understands what happens in insurance. The plaintiff's attorney, example out of California, big case, truck on the side of the road. The driver's there saying that he was there because he was taking some medicine. Really, we think he was there to relieve himself. Legally parked on the side of the road, except no flares, nothing that part of it, meaning he was off the road but shouldn't have been there, within 2 miles of a rest area. Somebody came in and ran in the back of them with an RV and burned up 3 things. Their 2 siblings saw their parents and their other sibling burned up. And before the court system went there, one of the siblings who survived committed suicide. That's the case. Somewhere the plaintiff's attorney put into that case, we will accept policy limits. Somewhere on the third page of the paragraph, because the insurance company did not pay the $1 million limit, they were now obligated to pay the $145 million judgment, because the insurance carrier has an obligation to protect the insured, and by paying policy limits to protect the insured, if they don't do that, then anything above that is at their risk. So most of your smaller truckers don't have a fear for nuclear verdicts, because if they did everything wrong, they will have that. But the problem we have is the $50,000 damage is now $250,000.
Right.
Everything has been accelerated from social media. I mean, look at that. When you talk about a Super Bowl ad that we're going to have the Sunday before, we don't know the results, but we're recording this. I heard yesterday, Budweiser's paying $7 million for every 30-minute ad. I mean, these kind of numbers are just horrendous. So $1 is not what it used to be. It's almost monopoly money. So we're doing this. And so we have to find, as an insurance company, when to fold and when to hold. And and everything we're talking about here is, by all the information we can gain, now we know what to do. And we're more than willing to defend it when we have enough information. But again, the plaintiff's attorney is in the same position. If they don't think they can get anything, they're going to fold too. So if we have all this information, if their CSA scores look good, if they have the training, if they told the driver when that black ice in Texas last week to come off the highway, don't drive through that stuff.
Right.
If they're doing those kind of things, and the ELD shows that at least they have made some corrections and they didn't do anything wrong, the plaintiff's attorney will fold before we will. That's the point.
Well, Tommy, I'd like to shift gears just a little bit, maybe transfer, so move us around just a little bit. Some practical things that you can give to us for our listeners that are out there. For two things. Someone that's new coming into the industry that's looking to get insurance. What are some things? What are some things that they can do to help them to be able to get best possible rates, and also choosing an agent when insurance renewals come up? When you first get your authority, everybody's experienced this. You get bombarded with phone calls, a bunch of different people. I guess they sell your information time that goes out, and they know when it's about time for you to come up on renewal and all that different stuff, and everybody's coming at you. What suggestion do you have when it comes to that process of selecting which agent, which insurance to deal with? Is the insurance industry still relation based, or is it now kind of moving towards who can get who's going to deliver the best deal for you? Does that relationship also translate into you getting the best possible deal? Kind of walk us through this whole process of establishing it, so we can try to save a buck or two when it comes time to renew, or when it comes time to decide which agency or insurance company that we are going to deal with.
Our concern with a quote new venture, someone there, and let me explain what a new venture is from an insurance company. That's someone who has not had a 91X filing in their own name. That's a new venture. That doesn't mean they could not work for another trucking company and have not worked for another trucking company for years. Starts a new venture. So let's take that scenario first. They've been in business by either owner operator, or they drove for another trucking company. The best thing there is, my concern is twofold. Can you drive? Well, then give me your PSP. Everybody can get their PSP. Their PSP shows who they used to drive for and were they operating under the regs and rules of the FMCSA. This tells me they operated safe. The second thing is, where's your money going to come from? What's your business plan? And this is all over, because our biggest fear is the business plan. Are you going to stay in business? We did a survey, and this company is writing most new ventures. I'm talking about the most new ventures, and we don't like to talk about people in their name, but when you have the new ventures and somebody makes a decision like Flo, and they write that coverage, you'll find that it's there. But we just did a study, and they're writing by far more than anybody else. But only half of the risks they wrote is in business 18 months later, because they canceled the filings.
Wow.
Their authorities enacted because the business plan wasn't there. They went through that. They took the simple thing. Now, part of that is the insurance company chose to cancel it, both for non-payment and for other things. You follow what I'm saying here? So go ahead.
So just to quickly interject. So what I think I'm hearing you saying is that sometimes cheaper isn't always better.
Correct.
Yes.
Never do the price. This is where you got to look at that part of it. If it's an absolute new venture, it's going to be tough to write. Meaning they never drove a truck, never worked with anybody. That's not what we're doing. Somebody right out of driver training school or this kind of stuff, they're going to have to work for a motor carrier for a period of time to build that history. So most of the new venture you have are people who had trucks already or are driven somebody else want to start their new business. Is that not, I mean, this part of it. Yep. Let me talk about beyond price. And this is our friend Hank's big subject. You know, the mistake that they make worse is not looking at the right cargo policy. They have very little choice on what they're paying for liability based on these kind of things, other than shop about that. And I'll talk about an agent in a minute of that. Where they're going to make the worst mistake and where they're going to be put out of business even way before nuclear verdicts is having the wrong cargo policy. Because if a crash happens and the customer's cargo is not properly taken care of, what that trucker has probably done is got that load from the spot market, the broker. They signed a contract with a broker that says, if the claim isn't paid, I have the right to hold all the money that I owe you. And then your trucker has factored that receivable. So now what happens is that the crash happens, the cargo's damaged, there's an exclusion in it because there's electronic equipment and you're hauling electronic equipment. The policy excludes electronic equipment. Now the insurance company doesn't pay the claim. The claim is $85,000. There's no debt, and that broker owes you $50,000. The broker's going to take that $50,000. Now the factoring company is going to come and try to collect that $50,000 because they already advanced that to you. And so now you got to fight the factoring company. So the place they need to spend the most time is with buying cargo insurance, because that's where it's different. Auto insurance is basically the same for someone with one or two trucks, meaning coverage-wise. Price is different, but not coverage. Part of it. Cargo is where they need. And the price increase in cargo between a good policy and a marginal policy is very minimal, maybe 10 or 15% more. This is where they've got to talk to their insurance agent. So make sure, and this is what they cannot do online. This is what they cannot do with our friends we talked about out of Cleveland, is because they don't take time to look at those kind of things, knowing the difference there. This is where you need to get an agent, and this is self-serving, but Chuck knows this, an agent who's been through 48 hours of my education with me talking to them at least knows to take care of a client, because we preach that. So we have the TRS designation for the independent agents, and that would be where you want to ask them, do you deal business with an agent who's who knows about our foundation, who has our designation? At least they know something about trucking. Even without that, are they going to take time to explain? So the first thing you would talk about, like, tell me about my cargo coverage. Tell me about what coverage I have. Tell me about the property that is not my coverage. Tell me things I have to worry about when a load's offered to me. Those are the questions that you want. And if that broker or that agent or the insurance broker does not give them the information, does not tell them those things, then run from them. Run as fast as you can. This is where you got, because the problem you got, the shipper will accept the certificate insurance for cargo, but that cargo policy say we don't pay a policy unless the claim is between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. every other Saturday. Right. And you can get a certificate. It means no coverage in it. The liability is different because you got a 91X filing. It has to cover things. Right. Cargo, there's no need to cover it. There's no absolute. So this is where they're going to make the worst mistake on coverage, Rico. The liability here, getting back to that, the only way they'll get liability is be willing to go and show their PSP, the past history, and then again being willing to share the ELD information. There's a couple of new companies out here who are specializing in the new ventures. But they're requiring to look at the ELD information and have these cameras. So they got to incorporate that. So they also need to explain make sure they have a business plan, where their load's coming from. You know, Chuck, you can appreciate this. For smaller motor carriers, when they ask me I have to send 25 certificates out to brokers, that tells me they don't know what they're doing because they don't know where the load's going to come next. Unless they have relationships with shippers that would value. What I preach, and you can tell me if I'm wrong or not, what a shipper or broker pays for is not to move something between point A and point B, but to be at point A when needed. So that's the dependence on that part of it. And this is why the price vacillates so much depending on the availability and the demand. And so they need to have a relationship ongoing with that broker who treats them right, who pays them right, who does not push them to when the weather is bad, and look at those contracts.
No, you know what? They really need to know. If there's a couple things that every carrier should know, like the back of his hands, and keep reading it. Know your exclusion policy on your cargo. You've got to know it because you can get into so much trouble. Trust me, been there. Okay. So you've got to know not what they include, but what they exclude. Okay. Right. Very important because that's, we had a guest on recently and they were talking about, well, there's going to be great opportunity for you down in South Florida because of the amount of flowers coming in from South America into the Miami area for redistribution all over America for Valentine's Day. Well, that's great. But I cringed because when you're hauling cut flowers, if you don't know what you're doing, and if you miss market, if you've got a load of cut flowers and your reefer breaks down, you just bought a load of cut flowers. And most insurance companies do have an exclusion for stuff like this. And that's where you end up getting into trouble. If you miss that market, if those cut flowers don't get there until Wednesday, the 15th, then you know what? They're useless. They can't be used and you're going to end up with a claim. So these sorts of things you've got to know. And the other thing is Hank Seaton wrote a book, Rules of the Road. That's your other Bible. You need to study that and study your insurance exclusion, if nothing else.
Rico.
Yes.
Do you know Chuck and our history?
I know that you guys from back
Chuck and our history is my father hauled those cut flowers that Chuck was talking about out of Fort Myers, Florida. And Chuck met my father's truckers at the state line because his mother was a florist in Canada. This is how far we go back. So we talked about Chuck. We talk about cut flowers coming to Port of Miami because they're coming out of Costa Rica. We know that market clearly on that part and everything Chuck said. Because like my father would not haul watermelons because if the watermelons didn't get there July the 3rd, they're not worth the same July the 5th. And today with the Food Modernization Act, that watermelon would be rejected. Yeah. And this is the problem here. So in these cases, you got to worry about, you want to make sure your policy doesn't have the exclusions for cargo, for flowers and things like. They don't want to have a spoilage. They don't want to have a temperature change. If they have a mechanical breakdown endorsement on that, you need to look at that. You need to have your trailers monitored so you can prove it broke down. These are the concerns you have, Chuck. You're absolutely right. Pay a little more to make sure you got the right coverage.
Yeah. So are those things for because I'm listening and I'm thinking about the stuff, all the mistakes that I made coming through. When I first started in business, because I didn't do any of the stuff that we talk about. I didn't do any of this stuff when I first started out. They told me I had to have this. I went and tried to go get what they told me I needed to have. So, that's one purpose of us doing this podcast as well, is to try to help people through the learning curve, so to speak. So when we talked about learning about the exclusions on a policy, is this something that before you sign up for that policy, can you actually read that to understand before you buy that particular policy? And if you already got a policy and you're not sure whether it excludes it or not, Chuck, from what I'm hearing you say is you need to maybe go back, pull out that long form policy and make sure you read through, make sure that you understand exactly everything that's in your policy, not just I got insurance, I pay my premium every month. And understand that you're making your payments and everything, but actually knowing the nuts and bolts of what it is that you are actually paying for.
Rico, that's the way to do it. We preach to make sure that our agents don't ever issue a policy they don't know something about. But just to wrap up a couple of things you just mentioned. First thing your audience needs to understand, they can hide nothing from the insurance companies today. Everything's public. You've got all the CSA scores, the inspections, the LDs, everything's public now, both for the insurance companies and the plaintiff's attorneys. This gets back to what needs to be shared. The second thing is policies differ. What they've got to tell the insured, the agent, here's what I'm hauling. Here's what I'm hauling. Do I have coverage for that? And if there's things, and there are the things in there that require me to do something to make sure I have coverage. I'll give you an example. Major difference between a drop and hook situation. Because a drop and hook situation, they have no loading and unloading responsibilities. But if they're a flatbed operator, or in some cases even a dry van operator, or even a reefer, or go chuck flowers. Chuck, how often do the flowers, the driver has to unload it and take it into the florist? This kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's one of the things that they do. Companies like Armolini and Florida Beauty, they have keys for these floral wholesalers right across North America, and the drivers have keys and they offload it themselves in the middle of the night.
My father's, one of his expenses was making keys to go in. And so what you have now, you have a policy that says we only cover cargo when it's at the curbside.
Right.
You have some policies, we cover the cargo when it's 20 feet away or 50 feet or 5,000 feet away from the curb. So if they're doing the loading and unloading by hand or hand truck like that, you got to make sure the cargo policy allows them to do that. If you drop in hook situation, when do you assume responsibility for it? Because the policies vary on you're responsible for it or when it's in your care, custody, control. These are things that they have to know enough about their business to explain their business to the retail agent, so that retail agent then can give them and ask the question, what do I have coverage when I do this? When I haul this, what policies, what type of property do I have to be aware of that I have concern about? Here's what I'm hauling. Am I completely covered for this? If not, what do I have to do to be covered? Because everything can be covered. Cargo can cover everything as long as we're getting a price for it.
Yeah. It comes down to, I think, Tom, I think our listeners need some sort of a business, like they need a business plan. They need
a punch list. Need a punch list to ask questions.
Yeah, they have. Well, you ask questions because you have a business plan. You can't just run wild anymore. It doesn't work because number one, so you're traveling all over North America. You're stuck somewhere in the middle of New Mexico or in Odessa, Texas, and there's no load. You finally find a load. You get the load from the broker, and it says for commodity, it says FAK. Okay, what the hell does that mean? Okay, and I've seen it. Okay, I've seen it a number of times from running a fleet going places we probably shouldn't have gone. And you can't take anybody's word. What the hell is FAK? You got to find out what it is. Are you included? Because maybe your insurance excludes what that particular commodity is.
I'll tell you another big mistake they make. They insurance the broker in most cases, not necessarily directly to shipper. Shipper usually knows the value of the cargo they have. The broker rarely, sometimes not. If the broker requires $100,000 worth of coverage, and the broker gives that trucker and you have a certificate of insurance and you have a cargo policy for $100,000, if the broker gives that trucker a load worth $250,000 and that load gets destroyed, the trucker is still responsible for the $250,000, even though the insurer did not require more than $100,000. So that's another thing. They got to come to the shipper and broker. Broker, how much is this worth? I want to make sure I got the right coverage. You said all I have to have is $100,000. Is that all the cargo's worth? They need to document that. So when there's a claim now for the $250,000, we got defense that they don't owe the $250,000. That's a violation of CARMAC. That's a violation of the regs if they do that. But they don't take time to look at those things. Or in some cases, Rico, how often did you look at a load and have some idea what it's worth?
At the end of the day, you really don't have a clue. You don't know what.
You have a clue about something is what it's close to be worth. I mean, this kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, just like somebody may think that if you go pick up a load of blueberries, you may be thinking that, oh, that it doesn't, you may not even have on a full truckload. You may have on, say, 16 pallets or so of blueberries, and you wouldn't think that that can't cost too much.
Oh yeah.
You've been in Plant City, then, have you not, Rico? For blueberry season, we're familiar with that part of it too. Because again, that's the thing. But my point is, if it seems unreasonable, question it, because they're liable for it. That's the point I'm trying to make here. Now, what I suggest they do, and Hank and I would do this: go buy a rubber stamp that says, when you put it on the bill of receipt, all I'm responsible for is the amount of insurance you asked me to haul for this amount of money. That then holds up in court, because that becomes a release bill of lading for the valuation. These are the simple things they have to be aware of here. And again, and to boil it down to, Rico, you asked me this. They've got to have a relationship with their agent. If their agent isn't willing to take time to talk to them about these kind of things, talk to them about what can I do to get my price better? If I do this right for a year, where I'm going to be? What can I show you to make sure I am operating safe? I know what I'm doing. Here's what I'm hauling. What worry do I have if I haul this? And if I happen to be able to pick up a load somewhere else, tell me the type of commodities I cannot haul and be covered. They just have to ask the simple questions. And most of the time, because it's what you just pointed out, all they look at is, quote, to be legal. And the merciful concern is to make the 91X filing on their behalf to facilitate their authority so they can run down the highway. That's the least they need to do. And the only way to do that is take the time to deal with it. You got to realize that in most cases, their whole livelihood, their whole business depends on having the right insurance when the crash happens. So they need to take as much time with setting up, buying the truck, on speccing the truck, or having a lawyer to help or accountant to help them do the books. This agent can help them in the future. And if all the agent is selling price, run from them. If they're not offering other things to help them and to take time explaining to them. The joke I think I've shared with you before. I remember this first thing when Chuck was hauling flowers for my father. I was actually running a dealership that he had on the same premise here. And after I sold the dealership, we sold the dealership. At that point in the dealership, I was selling trucks to all the beer companies in town. My mother didn't like that because I contributed 90% of the beer consumed in Lee County. But the first commercial policy I ever wrote was my favorite client, the beer company. Greg calls me up 3 weeks after I delivered it and said, "Tommy, did you read the policy that you gave me?" And I said, "No, what happened?" I said, "Well, you exclude alcoholic beverages. What did I think beer was?" So the first commercial policy I ever wrote excluded what my client was hauling. I learned they want to ask these questions, Rico. Agents, and that's the story I teach everybody. But what you got to tell your insurers listening to us, that's the same thing that happens with some of these retail agents. They never had the experience here.
Right.
They don't know these things. So you now have to divulge those things. Obviously, beer companies are different than these other things. Right. But this is a mistake we all can make. So to do it is the communication. Deal with an agent who understands your business and who wants to take time to help you be a better insurer, to keep you in business, not just the price. The lowest price eventually is going to come back and bite you.
And Tommy, I appreciate you. I appreciate you so much for coming on, taking time out of your schedule this Saturday morning to come on and just kind of reiterate and drop some more jewels on us here on the Racing Lanes podcast. And I can't stress it enough. You just said it. Necessarily, sometimes we have to get out of. We don't appreciate it when brokers are always pushing price, and sometimes we have to get out of the mindset of hear me wrong. Don't hear me wrong. I should say, is don't get in the mindset of always trying to look to save a buck. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be trying to save a buck, but sometimes there's a such thing as you get what you pay for, and money well spent. And understanding that, and critical components of your business and your operation, the cheapest price is not always the best thing for the bottom line. So you have to make sure that you're doing your due diligence and understanding the difference between the two. There's an old saying that goes around, the price of everything and the value of nothing. You have to understand.
Well said.
You have to understand that and know what that means to your operation and your business. So Tommy, we appreciate you so much taking time out this Saturday morning. And once again, please tell everybody how they can find you if they have any more questions, or how they can get in contact with you, and maybe and maybe even ask you, hey Tommy, the only question that I got, I'm in this particular area. Do you have any? We lost Tommy. Well, I was going to ask him. Maybe we'll see if he pops back in before we get ready to get out of here. But I was going to ask him if he has any agents in a particular area that he might recommend. Tommy doesn't sell anything, but he trains agents. So you know there's a resource there. So if you're new coming in and you're watching this podcast and you're looking for an agent or something, that may be a resource that may be available. It doesn't hurt to ask the question. So once again, I want to thank Tommy. I'm not sure if you're going to make it back in, but Chuck, tell the people how they can get in contact with you, and we'll get ready to wrap this thing up here this Saturday.
Best way to contact me is chuck@traffics.com. I'm going to be changing my email address in the next few weeks, but for now, you can catch me at chuck@traffics.com. If anybody has any questions, if they're having any challenges in their business or they want to get set up with one of the Traffic's offices, let me know, and I'll introduce you. And Rico, this has been great. Tommy is just such a breath of fresh air to have on and just kind of bring us up to date with the insurance business. And I know that how tough it is to run a trucking company, and I know how tough it is to run an insurance company. And they're our most important partner as truckers. So with that, Rico, I'm going to let you back her in a hole for another week, and we will talk to you next week.
Absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for taking time out to watch the show. We appreciate you. We do this show for you. Hopefully you get some benefit from it. And if you do get some benefit from it, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend about the show. Help us try to grow our audience. Help us, get out there and get the word out, because we're trying to give you guys and relay from our experiences practical, real world, actionable advice that can help you in your operation, equip you with the tools, and put you given different tools in your toolbox and tool belt to make sure that you can get the job done. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, for another week, we want you guys to stay safe, stay healthy, keep it in between the mustard and the mayonnaise, and God willing, we'll talk at you same time, same place next week. God bless you and good night.
Catch on the flip-flop. God bless.